We're going to have a dialogue with some key policymakers and advocates for women's empowerment in the region. I think somebody said a couple of days ago that we don't do research for research's sake, but it's about generating evidence that responds to the needs of decision makers. And we're experimenting a little bit with a slightly different format here. And we're going to focus on the role of women in agriculture and the role of women as labourers in agriculture. And I think that's a really neglected area. But a little bit of background, first of all, on LANSA, and then I'll introduce our presenter, and then we'll introduce the panelists. So despite rapid economic growth, undernutrition rates in South Asia are some of the highest in the world. We know that agriculture has the potential to be a strong driver of nutrition, but that potential hasn't always been realised. And there appear to be a number of big disconnects between agricultural growth and nutrition, particularly in South Asia. And it's sometimes referred to as the South Asian enigma. And it was in response to that challenge that DFID launched the LANSA research programme in 2012. LANSA stands for Leveraging Agriculture and Nutrition in South Asia. And it's an international partnership which is exploring those issues and how agri-food systems can be better designed to advance nutrition. It's led by the MS Swaminathan Foundation in India, and members include BRAC from Bangladesh, the Collective for Social Science Research in Pakistan, the Institute of Development Studies in the UK, IFPRI, and the Leverhulme Centre for Integrative Research for Action on Health. Looking at the role of women in agriculture and nutrition really goes to the heart of the work that LANSA has been doing. And there are some really interesting insights coming out from that work, particularly from the work that is happening in Pakistan that Haris Gazdar has been leading on. And we're going to focus on some of those insights today and then discuss that with our panel of policymakers. So first I'm going to hand over to Nitya Rao. Nitya leads the gender work within LANSA. She's also a professor at the University of East Anglia in the UK, and she's going to introduce some of the emerging insights from our work.
When we started this consortium, the big problem was the South Asian enigma of high agricultural growth but low nutrition outcomes across the region. And our starting points were really to look at why this might be the case and can we generate evidence around this agriculture-nutrition disconnect. So conceptually, we started with a paper which was mapping evidence from evidence to pathways in terms of the agriculture-nutrition disconnects, focusing particularly in India, which was done by Sunita Kadyala and colleagues. And they had identified 7 different pathways. The first 4 were related more to agriculture directly as a source of food. Second was agriculture as a source of income, but which could be spent on food expenditures. Then agriculture as a source of income, which is used for non-food expenditures. The issue around food prices, and we had a couple of papers on all of these during this session. The last 3 were really, according to that Kadyala et al. Paper, was where the evidence was unclear or it was lacking, and all 3 related to some kind of a gender pathway, linking women's employment, women's work, with care and nutrition. So there were 3 evidence pathways that they identified. One was with earning, that if women have control over earning, does this give them decision-making power? And will that then lead to more pro-nutrition choices in terms of consumption? The second was around the time trade-offs between work, productive work, and care work. So I think within feminist analysis and literature, there's been a long debate about production, reproduction, and the balance between them, the invisibility of reproductive work, which has now become a big issue even in the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a special goal for unpaid care, which is 5.4. But that was the whole issue around the trade-off between care, feeding, and women's work. And the third related to women's own health as a pathway mediating this link between agriculture and nutrition. So if women are spending too much of time, what has been more commonly called as a double burden or triple burden of work, which has an effect on their own health, does this mediate child nutrition outcomes? And we use these as our starting points because this is where their evidence review showed that the evidence was unclear or it was lacking. So especially the last 2, and I'm just going to give you snippets from the research in Pakistan and in India in terms of our findings. So as Rachel already introduced, I think the CSSR, Collective for Social Science Research, Haris Gazdar, along with Elsira, Elaine, I think who's also here, undertook a survey on women's work and nutrition in irrigated areas of Sindh. The sample was 1,161 mother-infant pairs. And in this whole survey, they found that 43% of women reported doing crop-related work while pregnant. So cotton picking, weeding, harvesting, and so on. And controlling for education and wealth, our evidence shows very clearly that this has a negative effect on BMI, that is working during pregnancy has a negative effect on maternal BMI. And it leads to higher levels of child stunting, particularly cotton picking during pregnancy. And 14% of this negative effect can be attributed to the mother's own health. So quite strong evidence coming out there in terms of how the maternal BMI or mother's health has a negative effect in terms of child stunting and child nutrition outcomes. I think findings from India, we did time use and diet surveys with 60 households in 2 sites, which was conducted by MSSRF as part of their farming system for nutrition research. This was repeated over 3 time points in the planting season, harvesting season, and lean season. And our key findings, again, from the time use was that 56% of total work, when we aggregate productive and reproductive, all activities, is done by women. But even if we separate in terms of what has been called as the System of National Accounts or Productive Work, SNA, and the Extended System of National Accounts or CARE work, about 75 to 80% of productive agricultural work in planting and harvesting, 75 to 80% of what men did was done by women during these peak agricultural seasons. So it was not an insignificant contribution, and also 95% of domestic and care work. We have very clear evidence that the time deficits for care were more intensive for women from landless and marginal households. So there's clearly a social differentiation there. It affects landless and marginal households in India, particularly belonging to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe groups, where we have as high as 30% decline in time available for care during the planting and harvesting seasons, and this also has implications on child feeding and nutrition outcomes. A third very interesting insight, slightly unexpected, compared to international literature, particularly in Africa, is that women encounter a greater seasonal weight loss, almost 3 to 4% of body weight, whereas for men it was between 1 to 2%. I think the African evidence is exactly the opposite. And what has been proposed was that reduced consumption, if there's less of food, and reduced consumption should lead to lowering of activity levels in order to conserve energy. But during the peak seasons, there's no choice for women in terms of conserving energy. So they have intense activity levels and reduced consumption. So I think finally, based on this research, obviously I don't have time to go into all, but these were just the key insights that we came up with sort of 4 key areas for policy and for further attention. The overarching one is recognition of women as farmers and agricultural workers. This is still far in South Asia. I think there have been some steps made, and we would like our panel would be reflecting on this, which includes entitlements not only to agricultural services, inputs, credit, land, and so on, but also to make, basically give them equal entitlements as men recognize women's work as farmers and agricultural workers. Leading on from this, we have at a second level, 3 kind of key areas where we would like policy attention. One is that agricultural policies and programs to be more gender sensitive. Second one is around nutrition-specific behavior change. But a lot of this behavior change, we would like it to address the whole issue of care deficit, time deficit for care, rather than just social norms. So move beyond social norms to address the care deficit. And the final one is around social protection and public investment to actually take serious account of reducing women's time and work burdens and also expanding choices. We have our policy briefs and some briefs from this research, which should be available on LANSA website. I think there are also a few copies available here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nitya, for that presentation and some really interesting insights there. I want to introduce our panel to you now. We're really grateful to them for having travelled, several of them, quite a long way for this session, and for giving up their time. And I think they're great advocates for women's empowerment, and we look forward to the discussion with them. So first of all, I'd like to invite Indira Dahal, who is the Joint Secretary from the Nepal Law Commission, and she's working on law and justice issues and has been involved in the development of a right to food bill in Nepal. From Pakistan, I'd like to welcome Nafisa Shah. She's a member of the National Assembly in the Pakistan Parliament. She's a member of several standing committees in Parliament, including Planning and Development. She has a PhD in anthropology from Oxford University, so also a researcher, and has authored recently a book on honour killings. From India, Dr. Jatinder Kishtwaria, who is the director for the Central Institute for Women in Agriculture. That was set up by the Indian Council for Agricultural Research to further the role of women in agriculture. And she has 3 decades of experience in the Indian agricultural research system. Welcome. And from Bangladesh, Kushi Kabir is the coordinator of a national NGO, Njiri Kori. She's passionately involved in promoting women's equality, the rights of marginalised communities, environmental justice, food sovereignty. And she's also active in several regional bodies towards promoting a common vision on land rights and other issues. So we're going to try and cover some of those thematic areas that Nitya has highlighted for us. So we'll start off with sort of legal recognition, but maybe before we get there, Kushi, would you like to explain a little bit from your experience with your NGO, what changes you've seen in women's work patterns in rural areas of Bangladesh, and how you think that may have impacted on the quite rapid reductions that we've seen in child stunting in Bangladesh?
I think it's a question that is very crucial and needs to be understood. I'll be speaking mainly from my experience with the NGO I work in, which doesn't work in all the villages or across Bangladesh, but we work in about 1,500 villages and work with a large number of people who are landless, poor women and men. Now, from a more subsistence agriculture-based economy that we had to a more market-led commercial-based production system in agriculture, the role, position, and situation of women have changed as the production systems and the reason for doing the production system has changed. So where women were first more within the home and doing the post-harvest, the vegetables, the poultry, the cattle, etc., they're now also moving into field-based agriculture. So there's a total difference in role. Part of it is to do also with region, sometimes migration within the country, and migration outside the country, and migration into the urban areas as we move into a larger urbanization. Now, what does this mean? This means that women are taking up much more responsibilities and roles now in the agriculture field also, and working as agriculture labor. So, and they're doing the homework too, care, home care, everything. So, which was discussed before, like the double burden. Now, however, the mindset that exists, that women are always playing a secondary role to the man's income. And so therefore wages are always lower for women, even if she's doing the main work. And her work and her wages is considered as secondary income, which means that, so when the woman is earning, and often people forget or do not take into cognizance, which I'll get into later when we have more discussions, is a large percentage of the women are women-headed households. That means they're the ones on whom the whole, everything is geared on. So when the wages differ, like when women are organized or during seasons when labor is scarce, then the women's wage goes up. But when there is ample labor, the women's wages are half or less, unless they're organized. And we've seen that when they've got organized, say from less than 50% or 50%, they've gone up to almost 85% of what the men get. So, which means there is scope for negotiation, and if that is needed. Now, what does its relation to the nutrition level of the women and its perceived the role with children? Now, women's nutrition level, I find from my experience, and we have people here who've also studied areas that we are working in, that the women put the children first. So whatever she's earning, depending on how much she's able to earn, would first go to the child's interest, not just the nutritional interest, but the education, health, etc. Second, to keep peace in the house, maintain peace, it would go to who are considered the more important members, the male members, or maybe the father-in-law, mother-in-law, etc. And in order, it's not that she's not aware of her rights as an equal citizen or that she's earning all the money, but what it means is, in order to maintain peace and within the household, she would eat less if there was less food available. So, whereas the stunting may not occur, her nutrition value status would decrease. And I think this is something that we need to, it's not automatic that, that a woman's nutrition, if it increases, the child, it increases, but it's not vice versa. And I think it's important that we look at that situation. And I just say that, yes, it is very important to know that unless there is a deliberate attempt to make a very clear position about women's role and look at women's role as equal and look at her as a worker as such, her access to resources, which is land and other resources too, employment, wages, everything is looked on as equal. Because very often within our governments too, and within development projects and within NGOs too, we have safety net programs that the government has, and women are often the beneficiaries mostly of the safety net programs. But what that does mean is that, again, she's not the main actor. And I think that is something that the mindset needs to change. I leave it over here because I'm sure there are other people who would like to talk, and maybe come back later when we have time. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think that issue of kind of recognition for women's work has really emerged as a very key issue for us in agriculture, where women are often invisible. Nafisa, maybe as a lawmaker, you can share your perspectives on the situation in Pakistan with respect to that kind of issue of the legal recognition of women and women as agricultural workers in particular.
I think the study is, in a way, groundbreaking because it makes the intricate and detailed linkages between nutrition and women agricultural workers. But I think there are many, many other reasons for supporting a legal recognition for women agricultural workers. There are economic reasons. There are, of course, social reasons. And increasingly, there is a lot of other evidence and studies which talk about feminization of poverty in our region, in the South Asian region, and also feminization of agricultural work as a massive exodus towards the cities for many, many reasons. In Pakistan, there are waves of movements to the cities. Some of them are led by climate change issues, floods, earthquakes, war. And so you have increasingly a big burden, and so I think women need to come into the center of policy. So there are social reasons and there are economic reasons. But as a lawmaker, as a politician, I think that there are intrinsic political reasons for supporting women agricultural workers. And they need to be recognized in their own right. So the rights agenda for me, it takes priority, and everything else sort of flows in. And nutrition, of course, will come in as you make women the center, women agricultural workers, center of your policy. Talking about Pakistan, what would be the starting point when I go back? Is there any existing policy? Is there any framework? It's all scattered. So I think a good starting point, and I think for all of us in South Asia, would be our constitutions. The Pakistani constitution places a great stress on enabling provisions for women. Of course, it talks about talks about equality, ensuring social justice, ensuring economic well-being. So all these form a good basis for a starting point. And but then, how do you put this in place? Then we have to look at our legal structures of lawmaking. Again, coming back to Pakistan, what complicates issues for us is that we are a federal state, like India, but agriculture is a provincial subject. So how do you start, when you have this big gap at the center? Do you legislate from the bottom, or do you legislate from the center? Interestingly, what has happened is that the previous agriculture ministry has now become a food security ministry. And they are working on a policy which again draws some fascinating connections between malnourishment and women. They're actually recognizing women. I don't like them to just recognize women as victims, as women who are malnourished, and therefore the nutrition policy should focus on them, because I'm more interested in women being recognized as agents of change, agents of, redistributive politics. So, but I think that it's a starting point. So in the food security policy, there is a mention of women. The other very interesting thing that has happened at a provincial level, in my province, which is the southern province, in Sindh, which has startling researches for malnourishment data, which is something that LANSA could take forward in finding out why a province that seems to be food secure, it's quite big in food production. It is also an industrial province, and yet is reporting a lot of malnourishment. So in that province, in 2009, there was a recognition of land rights for women, and direct and exclusive land rights for women through a policy measure, through a program. So I think there is a lot of ground on which to base the movement for recognition of agricultural women as agents of change. And of course, LANSA work on the relationship between women as agricultural workers and as redistributors of food, and the link between the nutrition would also help this agenda. But it's also going to, I think, promote social justice, economic well-being, and also as I said, this whole massive urbanization movements which have thrown forward, a lot of burden on women can be resolved. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I think you kind of brought out there some of the different policies across the region and the ways that agriculture policy is structured. Jatinder, I know in India you have the Central Institute for Women in Agriculture that was set up specifically to focus on women in agriculture, and I don't know if that happens anywhere else in the region. But how easy has it been for you in that institution to get gender mainstreamed within agricultural policies and programs? Maybe what have been the successes and what have been some of the challenges in that?
This institute is called Central Institute for Women in Agriculture, and I would want to explain what it is, because this is not nowhere else in Southeast Asia region, and why it has come up in India. It's 20 years since it has come up, because in Indian economy is largely based, it's agricultural based economy, and we cannot deny the role of Indian women, for that matter any women in Southeast Asia who's working so much. And we all know about feminization of agriculture and migration, farmer suicide and all that. It's really, really important to have an institution, because an institution can give so many strengths. And of course challenges, I'll come to the challenges as well. What are the challenges? But in brief, I would also like to tell the mandate of our institute is mainly, it's not that we are working or doing work for agriculture for women. No, we are working for women who are working in agriculture. It's mainly on gender. It's not on agriculture. But for the women who are working in agriculture, it is that. One, this clarification I wanted to give, because mainly people think that it's the agricultural which we are teaching them. No, we are teaching them gender. That's important, one. Second is the mandate is to reduce gender inequality and gender gaps. I hope all are familiar with these terms. And the other one is to reduce poverty. It mainly also has a mandate of livelihood options, giving more opportunities to women, and food security, and research on all emerging gender issues. These are the main things. The areas on which we are presently working are, because there is a dearth of gender disaggregated databases. If any other country has it at their country level, it will be very welcome, because this is an important area. Unless we do not, there is no documentation as such at district level or state level, where is the gender participation, the documentation, as we have NSSO documentation for men or the total population. We don't have disaggregated. Second is, what we are mainly dealing these days is technology assessment and refinement, all technologies. And we are trying to make it gender sensitive and for the gender. I can give just one example that we are working in a big way for developing gender-sensitive drudgery-reducing tools for farm women in different production systems, because there is vast regional variations in India, and we have coastal regions, we have hill regions, and the anthropometric measurements of women are entirely different. And we have a massive project, we call it All India Coordinated Research Project, which is functional in 12 states and giving regional orientation. So we have different mandates, and all these mandates we are operational there as well. So then we are also dealing with drudgery reduction and vulnerability of women. And then food and nutritional security and livelihood options. I will not go, we can discuss it in detail if anyone wants to know about that. And the last and the most important is the extension systems, grassroots institutions and capacity building is the major mandate. But and this from here also starts the challenges of our institution. These are, the first is that it's a single institution, lots of expectation and very, very less staff. Staff not that micro level working, means the dearth of qualified gender specialists who actually know the gender research and gender downscaling of all we are doing in a very proper and scientific methods. I'll request from you people that how can we make solutions for these challenges. Then the next important challenge is that the institution is not a commodity-based institution. We have 101 national institutes working, and this is the only one which is dealing with human beings. The others are also, they are dealing with maybe rice, the institution on rice. So then it gives you production, productivity, and the results are very, very evident that this many kgs you have done and the result is fantastic. And the scientists are happy, they have research papers. Here, gender scientists do what? What can they do? The whole process is so slow because there are so many, we all know, socio-cultural barriers, attitudinal shifts. I mean, it's not easy to change the mindset of people. For that matter, it's a big challenge. It's a slow process. We have to understand that we are changing human beings. But as an institutional head, I really understand and give you assurance that though it is slow, but we change. But the directions should be very, very correct. It has to be scientific, otherwise you cannot make changes without giving logic. Because I still remember when I was young, people used to cook in patilas, we call it in India. And now every household, poorest of poor, have pressure cookers. So people change. It's not that people don't change. We need to be correct in our methodology. Then the prerequisite of this program also, I would say, maybe I'm not taking long, is that gender sensitization is needed at a massive scale. It's not, even the scientists who are working in gender are not gender sensitized. Let me tell you, very, very few are gender sensitized. And it has to cross over the boundaries. It's not that the gender specialist has to learn only the gender, because for women, so many scientists are involved, the research scientists are involved, because she has to be taught about the right kind of production methodologies or production technologies or the varieties. And if we need to downscale something or scaling up, we need extension scientists, we need KVK scientists, we call it in India, and then line departments and development agencies. All men and women need to be gender sensitized in their own mindset, then only they can convince. This is another very, very important and major challenge. How to sensitize, first of all, ourselves, and how to sensitize those people who are doing gender work for women. That's the important thing. Then third is that we need to have a composite plan for trainers. If we want to gender sensitize, we have a program there, and we have a knowledge products and trainers training modules. It's entirely different program when you have to gender sensitize. But we can have a international kind of methodologies and trainers training modules to have that kind of material, educational material with us. That's another challenge.
Thank you, Jacinda. That was a fantastic list of challenges to us all, I think, there around integrating gender into our work. And maybe we can come back to some of the issues you've raised. I think that point about feminization of agriculture is we're seeing huge shifts in the region, and how do we understand what's happening there and the implications for that? And you've also highlighted the points of gender disaggregation of data, which is obviously critical, and some really interesting comments there on gender sensitive technology. I think sometimes we hear people saying certain technologies are gender neutral. I wonder whether that's the case. So it'd be interesting to get comments from others, either from the audience or if we have a little bit of time to come back to some of those things. I just wanted to move on to the kind of third area that Nitya highlighted to us, which was around kind of nutrition-specific behaviour change and addressing specifically the time and care deficit that women have, that the research has highlighted. Kushi, maybe you could take this one on. I know that many nutrition programs focus on behaviour change, and you've got a lot of experience from working with communities and working with local leaders in Bangladesh in encouraging behaviour change, in encouraging changes in social norms that will have an impact on nutrition. What do you think should be the focus for us in really thinking about that time care deficit for women?
I think the discussions have been quite fascinating, and a lot of it, I think, fit one into to each other. And I think, apart from the LANSA project, this has repercussions across all of us over here. I think it's important that we do not assume that South Asia is just one entity, and there's such a lot of differences within each country and amongst countries too. Now, but there's something that's very similar. I see that across, not just South Asia, but is the mindset and this patriarchy, which is, is pervasive not just amongst men, but women too. We imbibe it within ourselves. And the notions of what masculinity is, When I was talking about that recognizing women as an entity on her own right as a farmer, and it's not that women farmers or men farmers or women agriculture labor and men agriculture labor. You see, the thing is that masculinity defines that the man has to be playing a certain role. And that certain role is also very strongly reinforced within the household and within the home. Who is the caregiver? Who cooks? Who does all the household chores? Now, when women are out working and men are outside the home, maybe outside even their village, they may be migrant labor or they may be working outside, or even if they're working, the main burden of looking after the home and the caring falls on the women, and that is not considered natural. When I work with the communities I work with the landless peasants and the groups I work with, the first question is, would you do any housework? And the fact is, beginning, it's no. Secondly, the reason no is when you go into further discussions as to why not, and both are working, so what's wrong? I mean, do you eat food, so what's wrong with cooking the food that you eat? Is the child yours, then what's wrong with caring about after your own child, etc.? Do you wear clean clothes, so what's the problem with washing clothes? Whatever the thing may be. So the thing is that others, the peer pressure, others in the village would not accept this role amongst men. This ostracization or looking at men who do what is considered feminine work. So you have feminization of agriculture, but you don't have the opposite taking place within the home and caregiving. So that comes out as a deterrent to men wanting to help. When we find, and I find that not only in where I'm working, but across South Asia with other organizations, because I'm part of a lot of networks and do get a chance to visit many others, that when there is a strong organization on what we call agency, then changes do start taking place. And we think it's very important to start working with men too, and changing men's mindsets. So at the beginning it begins with, yes, my wife, or she has to go to the meeting, there is this protest, there's this discussion happening in the village Union Parishad or other places where she needs to be involved, or there's a training, so I'll be looking after the children then. It's only when she's not able to be present. It slowly gets more, you can get it much more that they start making it part of their daily life. So we've decided, when we have within our own organization, every month we collect data as to changes that are happening. And one of the data we do collect is men doing household work. And I find that the one household chore that men feel, because it's public and it can be seen, like if it's cutting vegetables or cooking within the hut where the chula is, then it's okay. But washing clothes is always an outside activity because the bathrooms are not inside the home. So it's a community place. Washing clothes is something that men feel that they would not be able to do. So, one of the indicators we look at is, are you helping in washing your children's clothes or your wife's sari? I mean, it's something that a lot of, they will be doing some childcare, looking after the child, feeding the child, but there are certain roles that they're not willing to take up. And I think we need to start working on changing this mindset. And, I feel a lot of problems that exist. And I think it's, it's interesting. We have people here from the government, we have from the institutes, we have a lawmaker, and an activist who sort of negotiates spaces with all of them around. It's very important that in making law and in ensuring the implementation, because we have a lot of very good laws, but a lot and total lack of implementation. So it's very important that we start working with men. And we have really begun to think, as a feminist, and I have no problems in declaring myself as a feminist, I think it's very important all these years that I have spent working with women. If I had spent a quarter of the time working with men, half of my work would have been easier. We are really thinking that it's time that we start working with men and also with women in changing their mindset, in learning, getting the women to accept that it's, as humans, of belonging to a family, this role. And this, I think, is important even in the nutrition situation that we're talking about, and in the changes in the laws that we're talking about. In changes, we have, like, government land will be distributed amongst landless peasants. It will be distributed in the name of both the husband and wife. But the control we find is always with the man. The woman herself thinks she's just got it as his wife. It's not that she has equal right and access. And we said, what about single women? So they brought in a clause, yes, single women-headed households will get land, provided there's an able-bodied son. That's ridiculous. So we've tried to prove, and the women have tried to prove, that without having an able-bodied son, just by themselves, they've been able to cultivate and they've got the land. They've got the land in their name. But the fact is, it's still a fight. It's still a fight. And then when you talk about agriculture subsidies, the subsidies are all looking at how it goes to men. When we were talking about technology, coming in, and you were saying, is it gender neutral? Is it gender neutral? And you'll kind of see the way the technologies are coming in and what they're being built for and how they're built and what kind of, methods are being used and the training. You realize they assume everything is with the men when it's the women who's supposed to be doing it, and it's not built according to the women's needs. I think so that kind of dialogue and discussion is extremely important, and I think, when you were asking, this needs to be boiled down even to the children who then feel that the boy child feels that the boy child naturally gets the better food than the girl child because that is what is given. So, I'll end there. Yeah.
Thank you. Very quickly.
Yeah. Just to add to this, I think that with this whole time care deficit, just to bring it back to that, I think it's changing the mindset of the men, but it's also changing the mindset of institutions up the line. So it's also about changing the mindset of state institutions. In India, for instance, we have the Integrated Child Development Services, which is now a right to childcare as part of the National Food Security Act. However, it gives the immunization and the nutritional component, but the child care element is not implemented anywhere in the country. And I think there is an assumption that somehow households will manage childcare, and within households, women. So even if we get men on board, I think there's a huge problem of male migration and male out-migration, especially during lean seasons, of our earning more with the negative terms of trade for agriculture, the livelihood diversification, men moving out into other things, and villages are often feminized or women-headed largely. And within this, we also need institutions to be sensitized, whether it's state institutions or market institutions, to be providing or to be willing to take a share of this burden, of this load.
Great. Thanks, both of you. I think it's really good to hear a reaffirmation of the fact that gender is about men as well as women. I want to move on to the last one, which is social protection, and come to Indira from Nepal. And maybe you can just talk a little bit about what you see as the implications of this for Nepal's social protection programs.
I'm highlighting some legal provisions regarding these issues. Actually, in Nepal, 55% women are engaged in agricultural sector. Similarly, more than 70% women are unpaid labor, more than 75%. These are related to agriculture field, household and family care, and etc. So this is not different from this South Asian region, I mean SARC region. So I want to explain some legal provisions in Nepal. First of all, I highlight to constitution. Everybody knows that we have new constitution in Nepal. This constitution have some rights to protection of everything, but some protection in related to agricultural sector and nutrition sector also. In this regard, constitution mention the right to food, food security, similarly food sovereignty. Our constitution, Article 36, highlight this point. And now this constitution provision translation in the law commission recently prepared a draft right to food bill. It incorporates right to food, right to security, and food sovereignty also, 3 components. This law related to women and nutrition also. Similarly, our constitution have right the fair labor and equal wages. It is related to protection, not only women but everybody. Similarly, right to social security also mentioned our constitution. It has many provisions. I don't go to explain now. We have Directive Principles. This highlights mechanization in agricultural sector, modernization, and farmer access to agriculture, fair market price, also covered in our constitution in the fundamental rights. So we are going to law these everything. And we have some policies regarding the agriculture sector. First of all, National Agriculture Policy. It covers increase of women participation in the agriculture sector. These are 50%. As part of the strategy of the Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperatives. Similarly, we have National Land Use Policy. And also land policy is drafting phase. It not finished, finalized, but it is in drafting phase. It will cover women's access to land ownership over land shall be increased. If it is final, we will be benefited for this policy. Similarly, we have ADS. ADS means Agriculture Development Strategy. It is under the Ministry of Agriculture and Development. It has so many provisions for protection of this issue. It also seeks to gradually increase women ownership for joint ownership over farmland. We have also gender-sensitive budget. It is covered in our annual fiscal budget. 10% of our budget for this issues. I mean 10% total of our total budget, then 10% for the women sector. this budget implemented by the local level, local body. You know, we have now local body, elected local body, they use the budget, and I think they maybe properly use this budget for the welfare and empowerment of women in the in this field. We have also in nutrition part, we have the Golden 100 Days strategy. This strategy covers the woman pregnancy to a child who are 2 years age. Pregnancy to 2 years baby provide the some donation and some feed for nutrition by the district committee. District food committee provide this this package program. We have Finance Act. It cover our annual budget to reduce the reduce the registration fee for the women at 25%. So the women are benefited by this provision because they can transfer the land, house, or everything, 25% less for the fee, registration fee. Right to food bill, I already talked about. We have right to food bill, but it is not final. This bill now under the Ministry of Agriculture. Similarly, we have some programs fight for this issue. This the main among them, the main is female farmer target program. It covers the female friendly agriculture instrument and technology. Ministry of Agriculture also implemented various training programs for rural-based women farmers. The small farmers development programs also implementing by the ministry. We have also women development program, and we have in formal sector we have the mother group, Ama Samuha in Nepali, mother groups and women cooperatives. This also effective in our context. I highlight some legal provisions, and we will discuss again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Indira. I think it's really interesting to hear that you've got some really enabling provisions in the Constitution and in some of the policy frameworks, and I think we know that the big challenges are around implementation of that. And I guess the challenge is to think through what some of the insights of the work on the time and care burden on women mean for some of those programs. It was also interesting to see that the relatively new agricultural development strategy has quite a strong component on agriculture. It's got strong analysis on the need for agriculture to be nutrition sensitive. So I think it's a very kind of enabling framework there to kind of move ahead with some of these things. Just coming back to the social protection, Nafisa, I know that Pakistan invests heavily in social protection. It'd be really good to get your thoughts on some of this and the women's role in agricultural work and what that might mean for the income support program.
Yeah, I want to share some data on one of the largest entitlement programs in the world. I think it's in the top 5, and that is the Benazir Income Support Program. It was started in 2008, and the context in which it was started was that globally there was an economic crisis, And locally in Pakistan, there was a transition from a long military rule to a democratic government. And we had just seen, the country had witnessed a crisis in the aftermath of the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. So the party that came into power was my party. I'm in the opposition now, which is the People's Party. And they wanted to come up with a flagship program in the name of Shaheed Benazir Bhutto. It is a huge social entitlement program. It has about 5.7 million families. And the most fascinating part is, and the surprising part of it is also that, especially in the context of Pakistan, because in Pakistan, most of the social delivery and the social policy was filtered through the male head of the household, of course, ending up in low social indicators for women. In this particular case, all 5.7 million families, the recipient of the income of food support are women. And this actually, it is a cleavage in terms of policy from the previous way in which policy occurred, which was often blind towards women. Women were, the policy filtered through to the male. Whatever women received was filtered through. It didn't come in with women targeted separately. Today, because of this program and these 5.7 million women who get this income support, it's a very small entitlement. But it came out as a result of policy that if women get the income, they will spend it on food. If that income comes through the male, there may be other contingencies that the male is engaged on, his social life and so on, spending some money on a cup of tea, cigarettes and so on. But if it comes to the woman, it is spent on food and at home and on the children. I'm not sure if there are studies, maybe Haris has a presentation tomorrow, he can talk about how this has actually played out in terms of changing the food data and on social relations and on empowerment of women. But one indicator is that it has, at the time of this program, only 40% of women had the NIDs, the national ID cards. And the national ID card actually is an entry point for all social services. If you don't have the national ID card, you don't even exist. I mean, all social entitlements have to come through the national ID card. And women had only 40%. As a result of this program, it's much over 80% now. They're still lagging behind the male, citizenship, the official citizenship bearers, but it has increased to a big level. But having said that, I think there is also an important debate because the whole point about BISP is that women are vulnerable, but yet if women are the center of income recipient, it can trigger, or it can lead to end of poverty or alleviation of poverty. But I think, as I said in my opening words, that now we need to see a shift from women as even in the Constitution, the enabling policy, the positive discrimination, the protection policies on women to women as agents themselves. And the whole empowerment, and me as a politician, I have a vested interest. I myself, I feel in the parliament, as a woman member, I'm always speaking of rights of women in the parliament because I can see how women, even in the parliament, come after male. Our voices are still a few steps behind. So there is an intrinsic empowerment argument, and I think we need to move beyond also in the entitlement debate. And as we are debating a policy for legal recognition of women agricultural workers, these workers have to be agents and change makers for the society generally, and not just simply as recipients of food aid, victims who will, when receive aid, lead to better nutrition indicators. So it has to move a step beyond that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nafisa. I think that's a really powerful statement to end that part of our discussion on. So I want to just open it up to others. If you have any comments or reactions, or if you want to ask a question to the panel.
Thank Khushi Kabir. She made some important remarks. In Bangladesh, actually, 20% of households are women-headed households. But women-headed households, not necessarily vulnerable households, because their husbands left the country and they are now getting control over the decisions of agriculture or other things. Now, the 80% of households where women are in Bangladesh, they are indirectly involved in agriculture, but mostly in post-harvest activities. Recently, women are now engaging in as agricultural labor because the labor market has become very tight. Males are leaving due to migration, and the wage rate between male and female are narrowing down, although it is still 60% of the male's wage rate. Our research from BRAC shows that women who are involved in homestead-based agriculture, the nutritional status of that family or household is better than someone who is involved in field-based activities. Now, there is a conflict and trade-off between field-based activities of women and childcare and etc. And finally, I would give you one important observation that recently in rural areas in Bangladesh, males are increasingly participating in household activities. They are putting more hours in household activities. Now, males who are putting more hours in household activities are having better nutritional status. It means that the males must also share the females, not only in childcare, but also in the kitchen, also in other household activities. So there needs to be a change in the mindset. And finally, in Bangladesh, women's activities are not at all recognized unless they can become parliament member or they can become secretaries. Women in agriculture or women in industry, they're not at all recognized, their activities are not at all recognized. So the government of Bangladesh must put something in the constitution so that women are as valued as males in their agricultural activities.
Are there any efforts to include this in academic curriculum, in school, tertiary institutions, because that would help in the more general sensitization that you spoke about?
When we say agriculture policy and programs to be gender sensitive, I feel, for example, Nitya talk about ICDS, that is Integrated Child Development Scheme. Now, that scheme is particularly for the reproductive women, and I mean, it caters to the women who are into reproductive age and purely pregnant and lactating women. And so therefore, you know, within women we are creating slabs. So at one hand we say that, okay, it needs to be gender sensitive, but in that gender sensitive it becomes more stereotypical and compartmentalized in its own way of operation. So we need to be sort of looking at that as well. And so therefore I sort of appreciate Nafisa's point that they are not merely recipients, but they need to be change agents. So therefore I would say, along with gender sensitive, we need to be innovative. That when we say that these programs need to be gender sensitive, okay, but I see a kind of different kind of shades coming up in the discussion of feminization of agriculture. Because do we want to communicate women that, you know, you need to take care of yourself? When we talk about care deficit, do we want to say that you need to take care of yourself? So in India, most of the state government has a program to distribute kits for kitchen gardens. And they are very happy saying that, oh, this is a very good nutritional supplement that we are doing. And so finally, we are increasing the burden of women, saying that, look, it is you who carry the burden of, you know, taking care of nutritional level of you and your family. And so therefore, every time when we say feminization of agriculture, we need to understand which shade that we are talking about. And last point, one is that in Gujarat, there is an organization which has worked on drudgery reduction tool of agricultural laborers or farmers. And they realize that connecting it to the reduction in BMI, they realize that at least 40% increase, 40% there is, because of those kind of development of specific women-specific tools, they realize that 40% of the labor that she has to put in is less. So, we need to sort of, when we talk about this public investment, we need to sort of also look at that what kind of public investment and what kind of, for example, in India we have NABARD, Rural Development Bank, and so, but the linkages are not sort of spelled out. Thank you.
I particularly liked how you describe patriarchy as a system which shames men into avoiding particular tasks, and I find that sometimes there's an avoidance in policy circles to name patriarchy and to actually name this system, this institutional, political, economic system in which men have power and women are excluded from it. And I really appreciate you actually, using the name patriarchy, which is a step towards recognising and kind of giving women agency. And so my question is, what scope is there for a programme like LANSA to work with and through, local activist groups, local women's groups who are already engaged in this issue, already activists at a very local level, already have a very detailed understanding of the issues that men and women face on the ground. Is there scope to act through those organisations?
I bring in some experience from health sector. In Nepal Institute of Medicine, where I work, we've mainstreamed gender as it affects health, including disease and recovery, and addressing gender-based violence in medical as well as public health curricula. And I have so many of my students in this hall. And my experience is that we've had great champions for gender issues among our male students. So my question is, are we thinking about doing some kind of more intensive research work to see how this works compared to just talking to women?
I wonder to see that due to work burden, stunting occurs. Is it due to work burden or incapable of getting proper nutritious food, or unavailability for them is a matter, rather than the research you have already given a reference with LANSA?
In terms of the work burden and child stunting or undernutrition, and I think what I was trying to say in the presentation, unfortunately it was very short, but I hope it will make you read some of the LANSA outputs and papers that will come out of this work. But it is not through directly the work burden, but actually the trade-off between time in terms of feeding and care. So we have a lot of data from our time use and also the other surveys that when women spend more time on agricultural work, they have less time for cooking, for feeding, and so on. Some of these activities, as Khushi said, are only performed by women. Men will look after the children, carry them around, but some of these tasks, like in Indian villages which we studied, even the cooking will only be done by the women. So there's a problem in terms of time available. So what they might do is only cook rice, bhat, and nothing else. There's no time to buy or cook vegetables or pulses or anything else because they have long work days. So there are various changes that come to the diets because of lack of time. So that was one point I was making. The second point was about the maternal BMI itself, that women themselves, as they lose their health because of loss of weight or because of ill health, they are less able to take care of other members of the family, especially the young child. And that also contributes to undernutrition and stunting. Thank you.
Thank you. Khushi, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the questions and the interventions that were raised were very important. I just want to mention to Dr. Bias with due respect that a lot of the post-harvest, which used to be a woman's job within Bangladesh, is now being mechanized. So when it's being mechanized, that's when I said the mechanization is being more from a male mind for a male body and male use. And so, it's... I think those things need to change a bit, But one thing is that Bangladesh is in a situation where, despite everything, we've done quite well in the social indicators, especially as compared to, where it comes to women. Nutrition levels, age, the kind of life expectancy, women being living longer lives than men slightly. So there are in education levels, all that. And I think a lot of it is to do with changes in the situation, certain government policies that have targeted women, the NGO sector, and I will not want to leave that out because the NGO sectors are a very large presence in Bangladesh and they have targeted and worked with women also. The social safety net programs that have led to women being able to access at least some food, nutrition, work. All this has helped women also in being more mobile and job opportunities, work opportunities. I think it's very important when we talk, I agree when you said about empowerment and agency, and that is something that has to go straight down. And I think the person who asked that, how do we get the grassroots women who now have developed an agency themselves to get their voices raised and heard? Often people say that you talk to people, hear you and listen. And I said, I don't know if they listen because I talk, but I don't know if it goes in. So there is something called law, there's something called policy, and there are something called, the plans or the work thing that through which the policies are to be done. I think it's very important that all of this starts getting discussions at the grassroots level and from both sides. Women who are empowered, women who are aware, women who have fought battles, and there are women across the globe and across South Asia, definitely, who have fought their own battles and won, despite all odds. These stories need to go out so that when people make policies, they can realize that these policies are not unimplementable. So I would say when we look at this question of gender sensitivity and how it is, that we have to look at it from both sides. How is a policy done? How does it affect women? How does it affect women, men? And which class, strata, and occupation. And I think that's very important. School curriculum is not enough. I think it has to go beyond. We have lots of things that are taught in school, but never really taught. So I think I agree with you that it has to go beyond just these discussions, but it has to be very, 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 very strong. And of course, a lot of men are very positive towards women, and a lot of women are very patriarchal in their whole. So it's not just that because I'm born a woman, I'm a feminist, or I'm sensitive towards women, or if I'm born a man, I cannot be a feminist or sensitive towards women. So I think it's something that we need to work on much more, and I think situations like this, openings like this, is very, 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 very important. I'll just say that I really want to thank you all for this opportunity to be able to speak, and all of you for listening. And I think LANSA can be very crucial in trying to bring the grassroots voices right to the policymakers and everybody else in between, in showing how things can be done, in which way, and how can it be, expose that ideas are possible. Expose what the situation really is. I could tell you millions of stories that over my 40 years of experience of what is happening and how women on their own have made such changes. But I think it's important that we learn, and I wish we had more people like Nafisa in all our parliaments, and in greater numbers, more than 50%. I think 60% should be people like you, not just women, but people like you. And then we'll have changes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kushi. Let me turn to Jatinder. So your final words. What's your ask from this group here? What do you want the research community to do for you? And what's your kind of commitment to taking this forward?
Let me tell you honestly, if I am on an institution, I'm happy. Why? Because when you are with government and within institution who's working for women in agriculture, you get better heard because you are in the government. So it is good for me, one, not me as a person, but as an institutional head. Second, that you can get things implemented, pan-India, and you can scale up your projects, link it up with ministries to scale it down for the grassroots. That is possible because you are in an institutionalization is helpful in that matter. But as far as the approaches, I would say, are there, I will put across certain researchable issues in which so many organizations are there. I mean, you might be doing, but these are the issues which are still, I think, need attention. One is that the approach is to, we need to still teach women at rural areas how to grow nutritionally rich varieties which give you nutrition back home. There are nutritionally rich varieties which are available now. Micronutrients, macro, rice varieties are available. Then we need to teach women about the government's programs which are running. It is easy to get funding for those projects which are helpful, which are women specific. Like you all know about integrated farming systems, which are good models, but are they gender specific models? We can develop gender-based integrated farming system models where women can do that. Then we can also work more on value chain developments and entrepreneurship development. And it's another very important dimension that educating women for food and nutrition security during climate change, her unpreparedness and her vulnerability, how to make her family secure in that times if it is flash floods. Can we teach her that she can grow the crops which are tuber crops, or they can grow and she can still have, and if it is flash flood, the other crop, kind of things, kind of issues are still there. And for giving her release time, I would never say that the 40% people get replaced. No, there is a huge population. We need to simply give them gender-specific, gender-friendly tools. It's not taking them away from their occupation, but easing them and reducing their drudgery. I have data, I have strong work on that. This is done. Or we are not bringing machines in all the places, especially in hill areas. No machines can work. So there is still scope for that. And as far as you have asked me these are the areas of research, I would say. And I would want from some organizations to help my organization, or any organization which is working for gender, for creation of more gender sensitization. The trainers who are very good in gender, we can have a training program wherever. Definitely. Otherwise, I mean, it has to be 50. Second, I would say, to prepare a model program, the same subject. It's a very important subject which you have raised, ma'am. And with all the interventions at various levels. It needs still end to end. It needs many interventions with all the indicators, with all the parameters, then take it to Pan-India and then can be given to ministries. So then it is workable and can give visibility, otherwise not. And for what I can suggest from my side is that we must need for a policy reorientation as far. This is important. That we need for policy reorientation of definition of who's farmer. We in India have a definition of farmer. In 2007, it is a policy that all people who are presently actively engaged in livelihood activity, it may be primary agricultural or secondary agriculture, they are considered farmers, and all the agricultural laborers, even if they don't own land, that is also a farmer. If this definition gets implemented in the right spirit, then what we can do is we can de-link the entitlement issue. Because in India, we cannot go right towards having, it's very impossible to change the mindsets that we can part away with our property to girls. So let's leave that. But we must consider women, we must use this law, which is already there, and today only we have given there is a proposal that we can, the health cards for women will be issued by Sushma Swaraj. That's again another good indicator. But if we can include all the agricultural laborers, and we can, even in Niti Aayog, we have a tenancy reforms. And if we can link up, have a proposal, and we can push our voice at Niti Aayog and then making a bill that delink entitlement rights to land, but give the access to credit and all resources to women. That is an important area, which I will definitely make a proposal, and with the support of your recommendations, we can have it away. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. I think really great point to end on there. Thank you. Indira, what would you like to see happening? What are your final words?
In India and Bangladesh also, both. Too much improve in mechanization, agri-mechanization, but we have not. So please let me know about this mechanization help to women farmers or not.
You know, it depends on what kind of mechanization and whether it's accessible and available to women for women to control and use. If it is not accessible or available to women and women do not have control over it, then the mechanization goes towards men. I think when someone talked about how we look at any programs, and I said look at it in terms of how it affects. Is it impacting women so that she's able to overcome the barriers of patriarchy? That's the thing. So some do. I won't say that it doesn't at all. Some do, but some do not.
Yeah, last one, and then I'll come to Nafisa to end up. No, go.
I would just react on this. No, I will not agree to this point, because I have personally experience in this creating gender-friendly technology packages, depending upon the situation, I mean, in the area, in the particular regions. And we have created a tool package of 20 tools, but the only difficulty was they are not accessible. How to make them accessible? Then we linked it up through RKVY. Then we linked it up through Atma. Then we got it subsidized. That is why I'm saying it's important to be in the government. We got it subsidized for 50%. They are available through SHG mode. It's a successful model, and it can be done. So we should never say a no to whatever is positive for gender in agriculture.
So I think definitely a conversation there to be continued around the role of different technologies. Nafisa, I'll come to you last, just to ask you to make your ask of the group and contribution. And I know maybe you can just comment both on your role in Pakistan, but also you have a role in the region in SARC, and if you want to contribute on that as well, that would be great.
Well, first let me talk about LANSA and where we go from here moving forward. I think it's a very good starting point, but I want to know if LANSA is a purely research, scientific organization or a network, or do you want to move out and into policy? If that is the case, then this forum may have similar panels where policymakers can come, and there has to be some feedback. I particularly I knew very well there weren't going to be other lawmakers. But I came because of course, I'm a friend of Harris's. We work together. He helps me with policy work. But I also found this an excellent opportunity to move forward with an agenda that I really think is the need of the hour. And as a parliamentarian, I led a caucus in the last parliament when we were this is my second term, on women parliamentarians, where we agreed or learned to agree despite our oppositions. And in South Asia, politics is all about opposition, contests, showing your differences. But we managed to come together on a minimum agenda for women. And I want to propose this, that if LANSA wants to move out and share its excellent research and policy to policymakers and want to see change in the region, then, there has to be a push for multilateralism, more multilateralism. Unfortunately, in South Asia, multilateralism is dying. SAARC is not as effective as it should. It's not dynamic. There are different forums. I just learned that SAARC has an agriculture center as well. It has also a gender advocacy group. I was instrumental in forming a SAARC women parliamentarians group. I think we have to push for, and as a parliamentarian, whenever I'm in the committees, I ask, whenever I have questions, I ask them, so tell me what's happening in South Asia. Is a country ahead of us in this? On gender violence, what has India done? What has Nepal done? What has Bangladesh done? And I think there has to be, because we have a shared responsibility and the challenges that we face with respect to climate change, poverty, are so common that we really have to look for common solutions and learn from each other. And maybe LANSA can, find a way. I mean, maybe you need to have a strategy dialogue on how, this multilateralism, at least on this one agenda of agriculture or nutrition, can be promoted by working in an institutional way with policymakers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I think, personally, I found that really inspiring. I learned a lot from it. I hope you did as well. A really big thank you to you all for having come and joined us and for having shared your insights with the group here. I think big round of applause to the panel.